Trump administration is about to do something rather unconventional. Dive headfirst into Intel by purchasing a large number of shares in the beleaguered US chipmaker. Specifically, the federal government has announced that it will initially acquire a 10% stake and a call option for an additional 5% at the current price, which can be exercised over the next 5 years. It's the latest move by a White House that wants nothing to do with the subtle line that divides politics from business. Just a few weeks ago, they forced Nvidia and AMD to pay a 15% tax on every AI-related chip sold in China. And now the new move is far more direct, stepping into the company itself.
In the past few months, the government has taken a much more active role in engaging the economy, a much more hands-on industrial policy.
But why would they want to get into Intel? What could they be looking for with this move? Well, according to speculation, the intention could be to strengthen its finances so that it stops cutting jobs and could make more investments in the United States, including completing the construction of its new factory in Ohio, making it the largest in the world.
This is a great deal for building leading-edge semiconductors and chips, which is what Intel does, is fundamental to the future of our nation.
You know, it's what some are beginning to call America's new capitalism with Chinese characteristics. And for now, the company seems quite receptive, although perhaps they have no other choice. When your ship is sinking, you don't pay too much attention to who throws you a lifeline. And of course, if you do sink, the last thing you want is to get into a fight with the government. So take the money and keep quiet.
Intel is deeply committed to supporting President Trump's efforts to strengthen the United States technology and manufacturing leadership.
Although, to be fair, the government taking part of the equity is probably a fairer deal for taxpayers than simply handing out subsidies. Be that as it may, intentions are one thing, and the likelihood of this plan actually succeeding is quite another. The truth is that many analysts see Intel as a beleaguered manufacturer in decline, whose future looks anything but clear. That said, others believe that we may be on the verge of a new renaissance. So the question is, where are we really? And why has Trump now set his sights on this company? That's exactly what we're going to look at. Let's get started.
Is Trump planning to take control of Intel?
There was a time when saying Intel was practically synonymous with the future, technology, innovation, leadership. A blue logo, a 5-note melody, a stamp engraved on millions of personal computers around the globe, Intel inside. And yes, it was literally there, inside every laptop, every tower, every office CPU. It was always Intel. They controlled the chip market. They basically had a monopoly. They were at the heart of the PC revolution. But guess what? These days, the heart is beating much slower. Intel shares have plummeted 65% from their 2021 highs. Yeah, you heard me correctly, 65%. A championship caliber crash. But that's not even the most humiliating part. Do you know how much an Intel share was worth in 2000 at the height of the dot-com bubble? $73, an all-time high. Well, do you know what the truly painful fact is? It has never reached that price again. After 25 years. Not once. Today, it's barely trading at around $25. Almost a third of that record price set at the height of the digital boom a quarter of a century ago. We're talking about one of the only major technology companies on the planet that has never surpassed its valuation from the dot-com era. A company that, while Apple, Microsoft, and Nvidia broke ceiling after ceiling, has spent a quarter of a century trapped between nostalgia and paralysis. And do you know what's even worse? This is not an unjustified and explosive fall. It hasn't been a one-off collapse. Intel's been a slow, silent, structural, and constant crumble, like those cathedrals that look imposing from the outside, but inside they hide invisible cracks. Small fissures that no one wants to see at first, until they grow, and one day it's too late, and the dome collapses. And that, Visualeconomik community, is the story we're going to tell you today. The story of how Intel, the silicon giant, the king of processors, the company that fueled the digital revolution, completely lost its way. How it stagnated while the rest of the world raced ahead. How it watched the artificial intelligence boom unfold from the sidelines. How it went from earning $20 billion a year to losing another $20 billion. How it has ended up with the White House wanting to get involved in something that could end up becoming a pseudo-nationalization of free speech. Because despite everything, Intel remains the most important chip manufacturer in the United States, and that's why many in Washington consider it a strategic national security issue. In any case, in this latest report, we're going to ask ourselves one question above all. Could it still recover? Is there a future for a company that was once a global leader and now seems to be playing in a league that no longer exists? Of course, if there's one thing Intel does have, it's pride. And if there's one thing it doesn't lack, it's history. But history, Visualeconomik community, history is no longer enough. Now comes the hard part, and in this video, we want to go through it together. From the glory days of Intel inside to the dark days of AI outside. From the $73 of the dot-com bubble to the doubts that haunt it in the middle of 2025. So hold on tight, because this is not just any story, it's a warning, and perhaps a last chance. Let's get started.
From Intel Inside to Out of the Game.
It all started with a chip. It was 1971 when Intel launched the first commercial microprocessor in history, Intel 4004. It was tiny, it was limited, but of course it was just the beginning. It was the starting gun for a huge revolution that would bring computing power to every corner of the planet. And if there was one company that rode that revolution better than anyone else, it was Intel. For decades they dominated everything. They didn't just manufacture chips, they practically set the pace of progress and technological evolution. Every year, every new processor, every generational leap marked the evolution of the PC, the Pentium, the Core, the Xeon. Generation after generation, Intel became synonymous with progress and improvement. Their secrets? Two advantages that are very difficult to replicate. Its own architecture and an unrivaled network of factories. Because while many were designing chips in PowerPoint, Intel was manufacturing them in its own plants. They dominated the value chain from top to bottom, and that was pure gold. While AMD was barely surviving, Intel was striking gold. In short, during the 2000s and the first half of the 2010s, they were the real masters. Record revenues, market shares of 80%, gross margin above 60%, and profits that were close to $20 billion a year. It was a well-oiled machine. Then something broke. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't a sudden collapse. There were no scandalous headlines, but the cracks began to multiply little by little. First, there were delays. Intel promised new manufacturing nodes, smaller sizes, greater power, and yet it systematically failed to deliver on time. For example, the jump to 10 nanometers, which was supposed to arrive in 2016, was delayed until 2019, and the 7nm jump will take even longer. Meanwhile, TSMC, the Taiwanese foundry that had previously lived in the shadows, began to overtake them. Apple, Nvidia, AMD, they all looked to TSMC to manufacture their chips. Why? Because TSMC was much more agile and was already producing in 5nm in 3nm, while Intel was still struggling with 7nm. And then came the second crack: architecture. Intel remained obsessed with the PC market. But there was a problem. The world was changing. Mobile devices, wearables, servers, data centers, the cloud, edge computing, new devices, new needs, new types of architecture. And amongst all this, shone another star: ARM. More efficient, more flexible, more modular. The result? Apple abandoned Intel processors in its MacBooks. Amazon began designing its own chips for AWS. And what was once a closed ecosystem suddenly became a festival of open innovation. Intel couldn't compete on all fronts. And what's worse, it didn't know how the hell to ride the wave. Then came the blunders. Entire product lines were cancelled. Security issues, delivery delays, the loss of contracts, and even the inability to retain top talent. And meanwhile, on the other side of the ring, AMD was rising from the dead. Yeah, AMD. For years, AMD was the eternal runner-up. But under the leadership of Lisa Su, it went from irrelevance to excellence. They launched the Ryzen processors, and then the EPYC. More powerful, cheaper, more efficient. And while Intel was drowning in its own bottlenecks, AMD was sneaking into every data center on the planet. And let's not even talk about Nvidia, because when artificial intelligence exploded in 2023, the avalanche was simply total. Everyone wanted GPUs. Everyone wanted their H100. Everyone wanted Nvidia. Intel, it wasn't even in the running, and no one expected it to be. It was practically irrelevant at that point. Its attempt to compete with with its own GPUs, such as Ponte Vecchio, came too late, too badly, and at exorbitant prices. Let's just say that in the AI war, Intel was that general who suddenly shows up with the cavalry when the battle is already over. And it was at that point when the market said, enough. Intel shares, which had been limping along since 2021, plummeted in 2023, just when the world began to realize that the future was accelerating and that Intel had no ticket for that journey. Year after year, revenues began to decline, margins collapsed, and profits have disappeared. In 2021, they had revenues of $80 billion. In 2024, they barely exceed $50 billion. And the most painful part, in 2024, they recorded operating losses of $19 billion. Yes, we've seen this before, from earning $20 billion to losing another $20 billion in just 3 years. And do you know what's hardest? No one seems really surprised, because obviously when you spend years looking in the rear view mirror, you end up running off the road.
The final letters of a titan.
When a company like Intel falters, it doesn't do so like any other. It's not a startup that fizzles out after a passing fad. It's not a loss-making company that lived off hype. No, it was an industrial rock, a legend, a pillar of the 20th century. And so, when that rock began to crack, the rumbling shook the entire market. But pay attention, because Intel isn't dead yet. In fact, the most interesting thing isn't what it's lost, it's what it could regain. Because even though its stock value has plummeted 65% from its peak, even though its revenues have collapsed and its profits have disappeared, Intel still has something fundamental: time, financial muscle, and a new plan. A plan that now has a new name: Lip-Bu-Tan. Since March 2025, this veteran executive, known for his long career at the helm of Cadence Design Systems and his role as a key investor in the chip ecosystem, has taken the reins at Intel. And along with him comes something that seemed completely forgotten at the company: credibility. Tan is not a snake oil salesman. He's a builder. He understands how the industry works from the inside. And above all, he's someone who's been on the other side, financing the startups that threatened Intel, seeing its weaknesses from the outside. And now it's his turn to fix them from the inside. And in order to do that, he has inherited and readjusted the so-called IDM 2.0 plan, a roadmap with 3 fundamental pillars. First, Intel wants to compete again with TSMC in the most advanced nodes. To achieve this, it's investing tens of billions in new facilities in Ohio and Arizona. The goal: to reach 1.8 nanometers by 2026 and prove that it can produce cutting-edge chips on a global scale. Of course, it also had plans for new factories in Germany and Poland, which it has ended up cancelling, and let's be honest, that's not a good sign in itself.
Intel cancels EU chip factory plans.
Secondly, Intel no longer wants to just manufacture its own chips. No, it wants to produce for third parties, from MediaTek to Microsoft, including AI startups. In 2024, they already secured their first external contracts, and Tan has promised to turn that line of business into a real driver of revenue and American foundry for an increasingly fragmented world. This could be particularly interesting in Washington, which could lead to strong government support, or even government involvement, as we mentioned earlier.
US to take 10% stake in troubled chipmaker Intel.
AI chips, modular processors, customized solutions. Thirdly, Intel wants to move away from being the Core i7 company and become the technology partner of the next decade. To achieve this, it has further increased its investment in R&D. We're talking about more than $17 billion in 2024 and an even larger budget for 2025. But of course, the thing is, all this change costs money, takes time, and a lot of it. And naturally, there's no guarantee of success. And for now, the market has not yet bought into the narrative, among other reasons because the financial results are still very weak. In 2024, Intel lost more than $19 billion in operating income, a staggering figure, a complete turnaround from the $20 billion in profits it generated between 2018 and 2021. And although analysts believe that by 2027 it will once again generate around $8 billion in EBIT, with earnings per share, EPS, of $1.43, the truth is that the recovery is proving very slow. So much so that even today, after the crash, the stock is still trading at 16 times estimated earnings 3 years from now. Let's face it, It's not a bargain, it's a gamble. And a gamble that comes with risks. Even more risks than we've already seen. First, there's the issue of debt. Intel now has a net debt to EBITDA ratio of 3.4 times, well above what is recommended for an industrial company of its size. This is a heavy burden that limits its room for maneuver. Second, there's the issue of margins. What used to be a business with gross margins of 60% now barely reaches 40%. Its profitability has plummeted, literally. And third, of course, competition. TSMC not only continues to lead in nodes, but also widens the gap every quarter. Nvidia dominates the AI chip business, and Apple and Amazon, among many other companies, are already designing their own. Not to mention that startups like Cerebras and Grok are doing things that Intel simply cannot replicate right now. So what does Intel have left? One powerful card: geopolitics. Because the world has changed. And although Joe Biden is no longer in the White House, and now, as you all know, Trump is in charge, the technological war with China remains a top priority for the United States. And in that scenario, Intel is the US's horse. In fact, although there has been speculation about cuts, the truth is that the Trump administration has not completely halted incentives for the sector. Funding from the CHIPS Act has been maintained, albeit with more conditions attached, and Intel remains the largest recipient of subsidies for domestic production. We're talking about more than $19 billion in accumulated aid. A veritable fortune. Why? Because the United States needs to have its own industrial capacity in semiconductors. It cannot depend solely on TSMC in Taiwan. And it doesn't have many other options. It's either Intel or nothing. So yes, Intel still has a way out. It has factories, it has subsidies, it has talent, and now it also has new leadership. Will it be enough? That depends on whether Tan can achieve what his predecessor failed to do, turning vision into execution. And of course, doing so before the market completely loses patience, because this time, promises are no longer enough. This time, the clock is ticking, and every quarter without progress weighs more heavily. That's why many are asking, is this an opportunity or a value trap? Because some companies fall by accident, and others collapse because of fate. In Intel's case, it hasn't been decided yet which group it will be in. From the outside, it sounds like a typical value trap story. A once glorious company that looks cheap after a brutal fall, but never quite manages to get back on its feet. And the data is scary. A 65% drop from its peak, historic operating losses, aggressive competitors everywhere, and a multiple that, despite the collapse, remains at 16 times its 2027 earnings. Where's the bargain? It's hard to see. But naturally, there's also a second way of looking at it, one that looks beyond today's figures and focuses on what it could become again. Intel is not just any company. It has more than 120,000 employees, a global presence, factories on its own land, proprietary technology, and a brand that still carries weight in the industry. Yes, its mistakes have been brutal, but its ability to react can be too. If Lip-Bu Tan manages to reorient the company, regain some of its manufacturing leadership, and position Intel as a strategic foundry for the West, the upside could be enormous. Because let's not forget, the world needs chips, and every day it needs more and more and more chips. Artificial intelligence, autonomous vehicles, defense, healthcare, digital infrastructure. The future is full of silicon, and in that race, Washington believes that having a genuine national capability, secure, controlled, reliable, will be more valuable and more essential than ever. Intel isn't trying to reinvent the wheel, it's trying to get back to what it was, a profitable, competitive, reliable company. And although many consider it dead, the market has seen crazier comebacks. That said, this is not a bet for the impatient, or for people who want to take more than their fair share of risk. It's not an investment with the wind at its back. It's a turnaround case, a reconstruction, a case of reasoned faith, with no guarantee of success. Furthermore, the stock is not being sold at a bargain price. It's not a gift, but it could also be that it's at its lowest point before something different begins. So what to do? Ignore it like a wounded dinosaur? or keep an eye on it, like a sleeping beast that could roar again. Time will tell. But if Intel's history teaches us anything, it's that in the chip industry, everything can change in a decade. Today, it's Nvidia. Tomorrow, who knows? Because sometimes giants fall, and other times they're just waiting for the right moment to get back up. But having said that, now it's your turn. Do you see Intel as a value trap, or as an opportunity disguised as failure? Is this the end of an era, or the first chapter of a new Intel? Leave us your opinions in the comments. We always read them. And remember, we provide the data, but you decide on the investment. Now, if you found this video interesting, don't forget to like it. You'll really be helping us out a lot. Thank you so very much for being there. Take care. I'll see you soon.